Usually when we walk into a museum and we see an ancient document sitting there under, temperature-controlled glass, we have this expectation of just simple historical fact.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
We tend to view these artifacts as passive receipts. Like someone wrote it, someone signed it, and it just quietly records what happened on a Tuesday 1,000 years ago.
We definitely lean toward that comforting view. I mean, it is much easier to think of history as a clean, chronological paper trail that's just left behind for us to, easily follow and catalog.
Yeah. But when you step into the world of medieval religious survival, that glass case effectively shatters.
It really does.
You realize very quickly that in certain high-stakes environments, documents were never passive receipts.
Right. They were active.
Exactly. They were active weapons. Or, I guess more accurately, they were desperate shields.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Desperate shields.
And the moment you recognize that, the historical record gets incredibly complicated.
Oh, it becomes the absolute definition of a historical and diagnostic minefield. That is especially true when the document in question claims to be an unalterable decree from a major world religion's founding prophet.
Right. And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive.
Right.
We are exploring a really highly provocative academic essay by Mark Bates, and it's titled The Ashtiname of Muhammad and the Corpus of Prophetic Covenants.
It's a fascinating piece.
It is. We are going to investigate a legendary historical document known as the Ashtiname. But more importantly, we're going to uncover the intense, terrifying medieval social pressures that drove a group of isolated monks to create and wield this document.
Because the story of the Ashtiname is less about verifying a single piece of parchment and more about understanding survival, diplomacy, and just how deeply vulnerable communities navigate overwhelming imperial power.
Exactly. Now, before we take a single step further, I really need to be completely transparent with our listeners.
Yeah, we should definitely set some ground rules here.
The source material we are looking at today touches on highly sensitive, deeply held theological and historical debates between Christianity and Islam. So let me state this explicitly. We, as your guides on this deep dive, are not taking sides.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing any religious viewpoints, and we are not making judgments on the faith traditions mentioned. Our job here is strictly to impart the ideas, the historical arguments, and the theological analyses that are contained in Mark Bates's essay.
Right. We are just looking at the history and the scholarship exactly as it is presented in the text.
Just the messengers.
Exactly. The goal here is pure academic and historical comprehension. We want to understand the environment that produced these debates, nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is the Ashtiname, and why are modern scholars currently arguing over a piece of parchment that supposedly dates back to the 7th century?
Well, to understand the modern debate, we have to establish what the document actually claims to be. So the word Ashtiname itself is Persian, and it translates roughly to Book of Peace or Letter of Reconciliation.
Book of Peace, okay.
Yeah. According to the prevailing tradition, this was a sweeping protective charter granted by the Prophet Muhammad himself in the year 625 CE.
Wow.
Which corresponds to the year 2 in the Islamic calendar. And this charter was allegedly granted to the monks of St. Catherine's Monastery, which is a community situated way out in the harsh, remote desert at Mount Sinai.
And that location alone is really important context. Mount Sinai is not exactly a bustling urban center where you can just, call for the local garrison if you get into trouble.
No, not at all.
It is stunningly isolated. And this document wasn't just a letter of friendly greeting. I mean, it carried massive structural weight.
Oh, massive. It promised comprehensive legal and economic immunity. The document explicitly grants the monks total tax relief, sweeping protection for their churches and their holy sites, and complete freedom from forced labor or conscription.
That is a huge deal.
It effectively outlines a permanent institutional religious liberty granted by early Islam to these specific Christian monks.
And that kind of sweeping exemption is exactly what brings us to the modern academic divide.
Right.
Because when a document claims to offer permanent tax evasion mandated by a prophet from the 7th century, historians are naturally going to put it under a microscope.
Of course they are.
In the source material, Bates outlines two very distinct camps of modern scholars. First, you have the defenders of the document's authenticity.
Right. So scholars like John Andrew Morrow and Ahmed El-Wakil, they lead that camp, and they make a very specific, considered argument based on geographic distribution.
Geographic distribution. What do you mean by that?
Well, they point out that similarly worded covenants, like the famous Najran tradition, they pop up in widely separated Christian communities all across the Middle East.
Oh, I see.
So their argument relies on economic and historical probability. This suggests that because these geographically isolated communities share such incredibly similar legal wording in their respective covenants,
Right.
it is far more likely that they all trace back to a shared, authentic 7th century prophetic template.
Okay, I understand the instinct there. If I find a pattern, my brain naturally assumes a common origin.
Right.
But Bates points out that there is a very strong skeptical camp, which includes himself, along with scholars like Moritz and Gabriel said Reynolds.
Yes, the skeptics.
And they argue that this isn't a 7th century original at all, but rather a diplomatic forgery from the late medieval period. And if I am looking at the defense's logic regarding the multiple copies, I have to push back on that a bit.
Okay, let's hear the counter-argument.
Think of it this way. If I am digging through European archives and I find 3 copies of the Magna Carta,
Right.
but all 3 copies use 19th century corporate legal jargon, like phrases like synergy, liability optimization, and stakeholder alignment,
Right.
the fact that I found 3 of them doesn't prove King John signed them in 1215.
No, definitely not.
It just proves that a 19th century lawyer created a really successful legal template. And multiple different groups copied that exact template because it worked.
That captures the skeptic's argument perfectly. Multiple attestations of late wording can just as easily reflect the wide circulation of a highly successful medieval template.
Exactly.
If one specific monastery figured out a precise legal formula that actually kept the local tax collectors at bay,
Oh, you know they're going to share it.
you can guarantee that other vulnerable monasteries would copy that exact same phrasing word for word. They wouldn't mess with a formula that saved lives.
Which leads us to the core focus of this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
If we operate on the premise that this is a later forgery, the immediate question is why?
Why risk it?
Why would isolated, highly vulnerable monks risk faking a decree from the Prophet of Islam? If a local governor catches you forging the signature of his religion's founder just to get out of paying taxes, I mean, that has to be an absolute death sentence.
Oh, it was an incalculable risk. But to truly understand why they took that risk, we have to dive deep into the sheer terror of their socio-political reality.
Right. Paint that picture for us.
After the Arab-Muslim conquest swept through the region in the 7th century, Christian communities were placed under a specific legal category known as the Dhimma.
Meaning they were a protected but decidedly subordinate class within the new empire.
Exactly. And the conditions of living as Dhimma were harsh, economically draining, and highly unpredictable.
Depending on the ruler.
Yeah, depending entirely on who happened to be the local ruler at any given time. The cornerstone of the system was the Jizya.
The tax.
Yes, a mandatory poll tax levied on non-Muslim subjects. And this wasn't just a minor administrative fee. In many cases, it was economically devastating.
Right.
It was designed either to encourage conversion to Islam or to continually extract wealth from these subordinate communities.
Furthermore, they faced severe architectural restrictions, didn't they?
Yes. Under strict interpretations of the law, they often couldn't build new churches, and sometimes they weren't even allowed to repair the roofs of their existing ones.
Wow.
So for a place like St. Catherine's Monastery, the vulnerability was absolute. They are sitting in the Sinai desert, making them easy targets for Bedouin raids.
Prime marks for administrative extortion from corrupt local governors.
Exactly, and completely defenseless against state-sponsored iconoclasm.
There is a stunning historical anecdote in Bates's essay that perfectly illustrates just the sheer pressure cooker these monks were living in.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
It occurred during the reign of the Fatimid Caliph Al-Hakim by Amir Allah. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah, Al-Hakim, who ruled around the turn of the 11th century.
Right, and he was notoriously severe and unpredictable.
Very.
The essay notes that in 1009, Al-Hakim actually ordered the complete destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
Which is arguably the holiest site in the Christian world.
Right. Now, put yourself in the sandals of a monk at St. Catherine's during that decade. You receive word that the Caliph has just demolished the geographic center of your faith.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
You are sitting out in the remote desert, completely defenseless, surrounded by hostile forces, and you know you could be next.
Right.
So what is your survival strategy? The historical record shows that these monks literally built a mosque, complete with a minaret, inside the walls of their own Christian monastery.
I know, it's
I
wild.
want to make sure we don't gloss over the mechanics of that because it is brilliant. They built an active Islamic architectural structure inside a Christian compound as a form of architectural camouflage.
It was a visual deterrent. If a raiding party of Bedouins or a hostile detachment of the Caliph's army came cresting over the sand dunes and saw a minaret rising up from behind the monastery walls, their immediate assumption would be that there was an active Muslim presence inside.
Right, or at least they would assume the site was under the direct protection of Islamic authorities.
Exactly. It would cause that raiding party to hesitate.
And Bates takes that physical reality and synthesizes it into what he calls the paper minaret concept.
The paper minaret.
If the physical mosque was architectural camouflage, the Ashtiname was a legal and rhetorical minaret.
Right.
The monks didn't forge this document to maliciously deceive people or to, rewrite Islamic theology. They forged it as a highly sophisticated survival mechanism.
Exactly.
It was an artifact designed specifically to make Muslim temporal power hesitate before destroying them or taxing them into oblivion.
And here's where the mechanics of that survival strategy get really fascinating.
Here's where it gets really interesting, yeah.
Particularly when we look at how the monks deployed this paper minaret centuries later. Bates highlights a pivotal moment during the Ottoman conquest of Egypt under Sultan Selim the Rest.
Okay, what year are we talking about here?
This took place around 1516 and 1517.
Okay, so the Ottoman Empire rolls in, and they are the new, unquestioned, ultimate authority in the region.
Right. And the Ottomans were famous for their massive, highly organized bureaucracy. They loved paperwork, they loved ledgers, and they loved administrative precedent.
Knowing this, the monks present the new Ottoman administration with an incredibly clever narrative. They claim that they possess this original 7th century charter from the Prophet Muhammad himself, granting them tax immunity.
Right.
But they tell the Ottoman soldiers the Ottoman High Command actually took the original parchment back to the capital in Constantinople for safekeeping.
Right, so convenient.
In return, the Ottomans supposedly left the monks with a certified copy, a document known as a firman.
Think about the bureaucratic genius of that maneuver.
Yeah, it's amazing. First, it conveniently provides an ironclad excuse for why they cannot produce the supposedly 7th century original parchment for scientific inspection by the new rulers.
Right, they can just say the original is with your boss in the capital.
Exactly.
And more importantly, the monks presented these new, powerful Muslim administrators with a document that invoked the Prophet Muhammad.
Because the soldiers and the mid-level bureaucrats on the ground, they were not historical scholars.
No. They saw an official-looking firman that explicitly commanded them, on the authority of their own prophet, to leave the monks alone.
Wow.
No local Ottoman official was going to risk committing blasphemy or risk an administrative reprimand from Constantinople just to collect a tax from a desert monastery.
It's diplomatic checkmate.
Right.
You can't tax us because your prophet said so.
Yeah.
And you can't inspect the original because your own government took it.
Yeah, they cornered them.
That single narrative maneuver secured their physical and economic survival for centuries.
It is a breathtakingly effective strategy.
It really is.
But as historians analyzing the source material, we have to look past the effectiveness of the shield and examine the specific forensic clues that tip modern scholars off to the fact that this document was not drafted in 625 CE.
Right. Bates lays out several codicological and linguistic smoking guns. Let's get into the mechanics of that forensics. What are the specific anomalies that give the Ashtiname away?
Well, the loudest piece of evidence is actually an absence. It is the profound silence of the early Islamic archives.
What do you mean?
Bates points out that if the Prophet Muhammad had genuinely granted massive permanent tax exemptions and institutional autonomy to a major Christian monastery, it would have left a massive crater in early Islamic legal memory.
Because early Islamic jurists debated tax law and the limits of the Dhimma system constantly.
Constantly. It was a massive part of their administrative structure. They debated it obsessively. The early fiscal manuals regarding the Jizya are incredibly detailed.
And the Ashtiname.
Completely absent from all of them.
Wow.
It does not appear in the Quran. It is not cited in the 6 canonical Sunni Hadith collections, and it is entirely missing from the earliest Sirah, the biographies of the Prophet.
So no mention at all.
None. If jurists were arguing for decades about whether they could legally tax a specific monastery or if monks were allowed to repair a roof, they would have had every incentive to cite a definitive decree from the Prophet settling the matter.
Right, if they had it.
Exactly. That sweeping silence isn't just a lost piece in paper. It is a structural absence in the legal DNA of early Islam.
Then we have the linguistic anachronisms. We talked about the 19th century Magna Carta analogy earlier.
Right, the corporate jargon.
What is the medieval equivalent happening in the text of the Ashtiname?
Well, the first major red flag is the title itself. Ashtiname is a Persian designation.
Okay.
But Persian was absolutely not the administrative language of 7th century Hijazi diplomacy in the 620s.
Right, that would be Arabic.
Yes. Using a Persian title for a Medinan-era letter is a massive chronological anomaly. It points heavily toward a much later medieval or early modern chancery practice, likely influenced by Ottoman or Safavid bureaucratic norms.
And Bates also highlights the internal vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
There's a phrase used in some of the related covenants to describe the prophet, the term Malcolm Mukorov.
Yes, which translates to angel draw near.
Okay, angel draw near.
That specific phrasing is a highly elevated mystical formula. It is very much at home in later Sufi and Ismaili theological discourse, centuries after the fact.
So it wouldn't fit a 7th century document.
It is absolutely not characteristic of the stark, grounded administrative prose you find in actual 7th century Arabian documents.
But the anomaly that really bridges the gap between historical linguistics and physical forensics is the signature on the document.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Because according to Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad was unlettered, meaning he wouldn't have signed his name with a pen. So the physical authentication on the Sinai tradition of the Ashtiname is an inked hand impression.
Right, a literal handprint stamped onto the parchment.
Which functions as a very striking visual warrant. I mean, if you are a medieval tax collector looking at this document, a physical handprint carries immense psychological weight.
Oh, yeah. It feels very real, very authoritative.
Except, Bates cites a scholar named Mubashir Hussain, who pointed out a truly bizarre anatomical impossibility with that handprint.
Yes, the anatomy of the stamp.
Right. If I take my hand, press it into an ink pad, and stamp it flat onto a piece of paper, I leave a print of my palm, the volar surface.
Right, your palm.
You would see my lifelines and my fingerprints. But the stamp on the Ashtiname appears to show the dorsal side of the hand.
Meaning the back of the hand. The knuckles, the joints, and the fingernails.
Try to picture that mechanically. How do you leave an ink stamp of the back of your hand with all the knuckles and nails showing perfectly flat and proportioned on a two-dimensional page?
You can't.
You can't biologically stamp a page like that without breaking every bone in your hand.
It's impossible.
So Hussain suggests that the stamp looks much more like a later artistic rendering, or perhaps a camera-like negative drawing, rather than a genuine physical palm stamp from a human being in the 7th century.
It is a fascinating physical failure by the forger. But as Bates argues, all of these anomalies, the silence of the tax archives, the Persian title, the mystical Sufi vocabulary, the anatomically impossible handprint, they do more than just debunk one specific piece of parchment.
Right.
They actually reveal a profound structural vulnerability depending on how a specific religion views the concept of revelation.
And this is where Bates introduces a biblical theological framework by Walter C. Kaiser Jr. to explain this. And I really want to make sure we spend some time unpacking it.
Yeah, it's crucial.
Because this is where the historical mechanics meet theology. Kaiser contrasts two different views of revelation, Islamic Inlibration and Christian Incarnation.
Okay.
If I understand the framework of Inlibration correctly, this is the idea that the divine word literally becomes a physical book, right? How does that change the stakes for a forgery?
Right. Well, in classical Islamic theology, primary revelation is understood through that concept of inlibration. The foundation of the faith is an eternal, uncreated text, the Quran.
Right.
And the prophet is the receptor and transmitter of that text. Because the theological center of gravity is a physical recitation and a resulting text, the physical documents themselves carry ultimate structural weight.
That explains why a forged handprint is such a targeted weapon.
Yeah.
If the legal system is entirely anchored to physical texts and the verified sayings of the prophet, a forged physical relic hacks that system perfectly.
Exactly. It's a hack. Physical variants, lost manuscripts, or highly convincing pious forgeries structurally threaten the core claim of a text-based revelation.
Right.
Now, early Islamic scholars were highly aware of this vulnerability. This is why they developed the incredibly rigorous sciences of isnad and matn criticism.
Unpack those terms for us. How did that verification process actually work on the ground?
Early Islamic scholars literally functioned like forensic detectives. Isnad refers to the chain of transmission.
The chain, okay.
So if someone claimed the prophet made a specific ruling, Scholars wouldn't just write it down. They would track the biography, the memory capacity, the character, and the physical travel routes of every single person in that chain of transmission across centuries.
Wait, really? The physical travel routes?
Yes. They would ask, did person A actually live in the same city as person B at the time they supposedly met? Were they known, to be honest? That's his answer.
That is incredibly rigorous.
It really is. And Matt in criticism involved analyzing the actual text of the claim to see if it contradicted established principles. But the monks at Sinai bypassed this entire rigorous scholarly apparatus by simply dropping a physical document with a supposedly physical handprint onto the desk of a local administrator.
Wow. So they bypassed the scholars and targeted the bureaucrats.
Exactly. Now, Bates contrasts that Islamic focus on the text with the Christian view, which Kaiser describes through the concept of incarnation and the promise plan.
Right, the promise plan. What is that exactly?
In the biblical framework, Kaiser outlines primary revelation isn't ultimately a static book dropped from heaven. It centers on a promised person. The promise plan is a divine word that unfolds organically through messy human history.
Okay.
It starts in Genesis, moves through the covenants with Abraham and David, and climaxes in the physical incarnation of Jesus the Messiah.
So the word became flesh rather than a word became a book.
Precisely. The center of the faith is a person in history. Because of that theological structure, the Christian faith doesn't structurally collapse if there are physical manuscript variants, or if a specific community doesn't possess a pristine original piece of parchment.
Oh, I see.
The theological security of the community rests on an unfolding historical promise, not on possessing a static legal document.
So what does this all mean? I see the causal link Bates is making now. That theological framework, relying on a historical promise rather than a specific physical text, is exactly what freed the monks to use the Ashtiname purely as a pragmatic shield.
Yes.
They didn't need the document to be historically or theologically true for their own faith. They just needed it to be legally binding on their conquerors.
Right. It dictates exactly how human communities respond when they are placed under immense, terrifying pressure. It goes right to the heart of survival mechanics.
Because when the walls are closing in, the Jizya tax is draining your monastery's resources, and raiders are actively destroying churches in the next town over, how do you secure your future?
Right. What do you do?
Do you desperately fabricate a legal document to bind the temporal power of your conquerors? Or do you rely on an unfolding historical promise that doesn't require you to invent a fake history for your own theological validity?
It is the stark difference between manipulating temporal power with a brilliant forgery and resting in a theological promise that transcends that temporal power.
That's a huge difference.
And to his credit, Bates is incredibly charitable to the monks in his analysis. He doesn't condemn them from a modern armchair.
Right, because they were living under the crushing weight of the Dhimma system.
They were terrified. They did what they had to do to ensure the survival of their community and their ancient library.
And we have to admit, they were brilliant at it. The Ashtiname is an absolute masterclass in survival literature. It is a monument to the endurance of Eastern Christians who were trying to keep their communities alive under centuries of shifting Islamic rule.
It's just not a factual 7th century decree from Muhammad.
No, it's not. Well, that is all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for exploring the murky, fascinating history of the Ashtiname with us. Keep questioning what you read, and we will catch you on the next one.
Wait, before we go, the story of the Ashtiname leaves us with a rather profound question to consider.
Oh, yeah?
If a diplomatic forgery, a fake document, successfully protects a highly vulnerable community for half a millennium, if it prevents bloodshed, and if it stops the destruction of ancient knowledge, at what point does its practical life-saving impact eclipse the fact that it was historically inaccurate?
That's a deep question.
It forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, how many of the foundational historical truths that we accept today in our own cultures might have actually started out centuries ago as desperate paper shields?